Hey everybody, Smart Silver Stacker here. The game of escalatory brinksmanship between the West and Russia has taken another step forward over the weekend, bringing us closer to the prospect of an expanded conflict and potential economic disaster. Following last week's news that Russian gas giant Gazprom had slashed natural gas flows to Germany via the Nord Stream pipeline by 60%, the Lithuanian government announced on Saturday a ban on the transit of goods to the geographically isolated Russian enclave of Kaliningrad. Sandwiched between Lithuania and Poland on the shores of the Baltic Sea, Kaliningrad is separated from Russian ally Belarus by a sparsely populated, relatively flat and wide-open 40-mile stretch of land known as the Suwalki Corridor. It has long been speculated that the Suwalki Corridor could be a prime target for invasion if Russia were to initiate an attack on NATO territory. And it is possible that they just got what in their mind is a reasonable justification for such a strike. Aside from the potentially disastrous strategic and humanitarian consequences of such an escalation in the ongoing conflict, there also lies the potential for a tremendous economic cost to be paid by all players involved, including those of us in the US. And that's what we're going to talk about in today's video, so let's get to it. Okay, so Russia has cut the flow of natural gas to Germany through the Nord Stream pipeline by 60%, and this is causing an energy crisis in Europe. This is really driving the price of gas up much higher, and Russia is now claiming that this is the fault of Germany. Germany's Siemens Energy was servicing some Russian gas turbines that are used on the Nord Stream pipeline, and now Russia claims that they are refusing to return this equipment because of sanctions against Russia. Germany has said that this is a fabrication and that Russia is just doing this out of political motivations, although I haven't seen them specifically dispute the fact that they're not returning these turbines. So, the truth is blurry to say the least, but the important thing is that the price of natural gas has spiked up in Europe. This is the 1 month chart of EU natural gas, and as you can see, it moved much higher last week on this development. But that is not the only escalation in this conflict. On Saturday, the Lithuanian government announced that it would be blockading the shipment of goods into Kaliningrad by rail. And Kaliningrad it's not part of Russia's contiguous territory. It's a geographically isolated enclave on the Baltic Sea, and it shares a border with Poland and Lithuania. And currently, up until this announcement, a lot of the goods that went into Kaliningrad entered via rail from Lithuania. And Kaliningrad is notably home to over 1 million people, and also there are Russian nuclear weapons kept there. So this is an important territory, and the fact that the Lithuanians are now blockading this is certainly going to antagonize the Russians. Will it antagonize them into an attack on NATO territory? It's hard to say, but it certainly could be interpreted as an excuse for such a strike. And it has long been speculated that this could be a hotspot and a potential location for a strike. In fact, back in March, this is a clip from Russian state TV in which this guy here is threatening a invasion that would open a corridor to Kaliningrad, and I'll play the clip for you.
Вот в Калининграде, я знаю, сейчас большие проблемы на границе. Может быть, актуальным становится вопрос коридора до Калининграда? Коридора, сухопутного коридора до Калининграда. А почему нет?
Ну, если уж до Приднестровья
Мне кажется, что государства под названием Литва и государства под названием Польша ведут себя...
Okay, so if that was the rhetoric back in March, before this conflict had escalated to the levels that we're at today, and before this blockade was announced, imagine how the Russians are going to interpret this. There's a real possibility that this could trigger an attack by Russia on NATO territory. This is an article from foreignpolicy.com. This is written by John Denny. He's a research professor at the U.S. Army War College's Strategic Studies Institute, and this was written back on March 3rd. And he's saying that the Suwalki Corridor, that's the 40-mile stretch of land that separates Kaliningrad from Russian ally Belarus, saying that's NATO's weakest point and that NATO needs to prepare to defend it because that is a likely site for an attack. And just to give you an idea of what the Russian psychology around Kaliningrad is like, I'll read you this paragraph from this article. Kaliningrad, formerly Königsberg, has been Russian territory since the end of World War II, and it's now home to substantial Russian combat forces, including the Russian Baltic Fleet, advanced air defenses, and mobile nuclear-capable Iskander-M missiles. Given this, Russia is particularly sensitive to any perceived threats to its control of the non-contiguous territory and might risk escalation if it misinterpreted NATO's actions near Kaliningrad. And so I don't know that they're going to be misinterpreting NATO's intentions. I mean, it seems like the intention of the Lithuanian government is to isolate this enclave of Kaliningrad. And on this news of the blockade, the Russian response so far has been to tell citizens within Kaliningrad to not panic buy goods. I mean, that has really been the gist of their response so far. We haven't really heard too much rhetoric regarding a land corridor or anything further yet. But again, this just happened over the weekend, so we'll have to see what happens this week. The Russians are saying that they'll be able to ship in any goods needed by the population via the Baltic Sea. And so, it's not like a siege entirely. However, clearly this is already a touchy subject for the Russians. And so, what Lithuania hopes to achieve by implementing this blockade is kind of hard to say. But one thing that's for sure, if this does turn into some kind of a conflict, there is going to be a lot of economic pain. I mean, obviously, there's the risk of just a greatly expanded war and even the possibility of the use of nuclear weapons. But let's say we avoid that. I do think that an obvious consequence of a war over Kaliningrad would be the gas flows, at the very least, from Russia would be halted entirely to the EU. And already, even with just this 60% cut that we saw last week, the situation is getting pretty serious. Here's a headline from today about how Germany is planning to revert to using coal power plants for energy production. And you know what sticklers they are for green energy over there in the EU. So for them to be considering firing up the coal plants, things are very serious. And if we do see this escalate, this conflict, if Russia and NATO go head to head, the economic fallout at the very least is going to be absolutely disastrous. We know that a lot of European banks are extremely levered up or are extremely vulnerable to downturns in the economy. The risk of some kind of a financial contagion affecting the entire Western financial system is absolutely present. And so this is something that we should all be paying attention to. The consequences of an attack to open up a land corridor to Kaliningrad are almost unpredictable. They're so dire, potentially. But one thing you can do is you can try to make yourself more financially resilient and get exposure to real, physical, tangible hard money like gold and silver, the kind of money that can't just go poof in a crisis and just disappear. I'm not saying you want to get entirely out of cash, entirely out of stocks, entirely out of paper assets or electronic assets, but with the risk of World War III at hand and the potential economic fallout from that being, almost unknowable and unpredictable, I would not feel comfortable if I did not have any hard money. And so with precious metals prices as low as they are, I think it is a good time to stack, especially if you don't have any hard metal. It's not financial advice, just my thoughts on the matter. But let me know what you think in the comments down below. Thank you all very much for watching, and I will catch you next time. Smart Silver Stacker, out.